the 0 Hour. This is Richard RJ Eskow. You know, some things change and some things don't after this election. Big Pharma, for example, is still big. It's still big in this town of Washington, D.C., and there's a new law that proves it. Here to talk to us now about that law is Sarah Sorscher. Sarah is an attorney at the Health Research Group of Public Citizen. You know the group Public Citizen. Her work focuses on consumer health and safety, particularly regulation of certain products, Medicare coverage, medical device regulation, and ethics and clinical trials, all of which are very interesting and important topics. So first of all, Sarah, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And secondly, what do we know about the 21st Century Cures Act? And I should preface that question by saying Donald Trump ran on, I'm going to make it easier for drugs to get to market. Republicans have been saying that for a long time. What does the 21st Century Cures Act really do?
Good question. So this is something that was envisioned as a bargain of sorts in exchange for funding for National Institutes of Health to do public biomedical research. There were a number of concessions made to the pharmaceutical industry that would lower the standards needed to approve drugs and medical devices in order to get products approved faster and more cheaply. As it turned out, the NIH funding in the final version of the bill is far from guaranteed. And a future Republican Congress could decide independently to not distribute these funds or to spend them elsewhere or to extract additional concessions before distributing them.
So let me just stop you for a second, Sarah. So this law basically was negotiated on the basis that we'll make it cheaper and easier and faster for you to get the drugs to market in return for some financial concessions, some funding for research, but they're getting what they want, but we don't know if everybody else is getting what they need or want.
Right, and I should make clear that Pharma benefits on both ends, right? Because Pharma gets the research that's produced by this public funding, but it also gets, to benefit from not having to test the drugs itself, so as rigorously. But the trade is between Democrats and Republicans, not wanting to spend more on NIH funding, but also wanting to stimulate industry. So that's kind of the back and forth that happened.
So it seems to me that, first of all, the system is fundamentally messed up all around because the public pays for a lot of this research anyway. The drug companies patent it. They get exclusivity over it for an extended period of time. They make a fortune on it. They overcharge the American people. Now, as I understand it, now comes the 21st Century Cures Act, which is going to make it cheaper and easier for them to bring new drugs to market. But really, I'm not getting what's in, this bill has some bipartisan support from Democrats as well, although others like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders oppose it. I'm not getting what's in this bill for the American people.
Yeah, I mean, that was a tough one for us as well. You're right. And one of the big objections we had to this bill was that it didn't include anything on drug pricing. We know consumers are already really being put in a corner by drug companies who are some of the most profitable businesses that exist. We have skyrocketing drug prices, and Congress should be addressing those concerns. That was the big issue for voters in this last election, instead of this massive gift for Pharma right before the holidays. In terms of what's in it for patients, patients want NIH funding, and they want better cures. I think the problem is what this bill does is that in order to accelerate cures, it attacks FDA, it attacks the gatekeeper, who's there at the end of the process trying to determine if a product is safe and effective. And if you don't have better products moving down the pipeline, it's not helping patients to get those drugs approved. Right. And I think that's the confusion that a lot of patient groups have with this legislation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it sounds good at first to say, well, it takes a long time to get drugs to market and people are sick, so let's get those drugs to market more quickly. But it also doesn't do anybody a favor to give them an untested drug. I mean, I remember there were deaths, I think it was Vioxx or something, but we've had drugs on the market that that have caused deaths because they weren't adequately tested. And I guess another problem I have with this 21st Century Cures Act is that, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the EpiPen situation, but they've been charging outrageous rates, big pharma corporation charging outrageous price increases for the EpiPen. There's an entrepreneur who wants to come up with a competitive product and thinks he needs $2 million to bring it to market. Well, I can see helping that guy with his $2 million worth of testing, but these big pharma companies, why do they need help paying for testing or shortcutting the testing process? They've got the money.
That's right. We've never been opposed to increasing NIH funding. I think the problem with this bill is that the way it ties NIH funding to gutting the FDA, and I think it sets a really bad precedent for how we're going to do these deals moving forward. I agree there should be grants for businesses that want to create good generic drugs, want to create new, innovative, safe and effective drugs that are going to help patients. But that should be done through the standard NIH budget, which has been flatlined, been sinking for the past few years due to austerity measures. And in real dollars, and inflation-adjusted dollars, it's plunged dramatically over the past 10 years. So we have an NIH that's struggling, and you're giving them this little boost, which is very small compared to what they've lost. And it's temporary, and it's in exchange for concessions on regulation. And this is really not how we want to be doing research moving forward.
You know where I don't want government cutting corners is on the drugs that I and my family put into our bodies on a daily basis. That just doesn't strike me on the things that could kill you. That just doesn't strike me as a great place for cost cutting. But Sarah, you mentioned a couple times that this bill guts the FDA as well as really providing paltry funding for the NIH. How does it gut the FDA?
So there are a number of different provisions. Now, I should say here, we are lucky because the earlier version of this bill did a lot worse. The first draft that was introduced was just full of presents for pharma, and they were very serious reforms to the way the FDA operates. This version has been negotiated down a bit, and we should acknowledge that. I think, so the areas where it still makes some negative changes, for new indications, there's sort of a double standard developing between the first time you get a drug approved and then indications that come after the new uses you have. The evidence FDA considers for those is already a little bit lower, and this pushes them to use lower quality evidence, not look at randomized controlled trials, look at other kinds of data.
So new indications being, just so that listeners understand, that would be, for example, if you have a drug, I don't know, I can't remember now if it's Seroquel or something, or say perhaps first approved for use in schizophrenia, and then they decide it might help in small amounts for sleep or whatever. But whatever,
something
new
like
indication
that, yeah.
being it wasn't originally what it was approved for, but they think it's good for that too. So you have to test for that as well, right?
So yeah, a drug suppresses the immune system. Maybe you're using it for psoriasis. Maybe you're using it for another autoimmune disorder. Every time you pick a new use, you should actually run a trial to see if it actually works for that use, because sometimes they don't, and sometimes the risks are more serious for that use because it's not as a significant benefit.
Yeah. Okay. So this one, what does this do?
It would be a double standard for that. So it's pushing FDA to look at not at randomized controlled clinical trials, the gold standard for biomedical research, but at real world evidence. That means case studies, little anecdotes, or a series of anecdotes. And the problem there is that you can't really tell if someone's benefiting if it's because they were better off to begin with, or if it's because the population you chose. Unless you have a control group, and the real world evidence lacks that. So it's pushing FDA to rely on that more when it approves new uses. It's asking FDA to take summaries of information instead of looking at the full data set. So with summaries, of course, the company can kind of pick and choose what it wants to report, what it emphasizes, and that makes it easier to sneak things past FDA reviewers. Also, there's a new provision about antibiotics that would ask for these to be tested in a really limited population of patients before letting them out. And FDA standards for antibiotics are already really dangerously low. We have at least 2 drugs approved over the past 5 to 10 years that actually kill more in clinical trials and randomized trials. They killed significantly more patients than versus patients who didn't receive that drug and got the other antibiotics that are already available. So those were approved and they remain on the market. And so, so pushing FDA to accept less data for antibiotics is not a good idea. It should be moving in the other direction. Same thing with medical devices. A lot of medical devices don't actually get those randomized controlled trials now. It's something like 1/5. And those are just the very highest risk. Only 1/5 of them are tested in those trials already. And this creates a new pathway and says, FDA, we want you to accelerate approval of breakthrough devices. A breakthrough device is any device that has a benefit for patients. That's the definition in the statute.
Which basically means any device, because presumably it would only
you wouldn't approve it if it didn't benefit patients.
If somebody didn't think it would benefit somebody, you wouldn't approve it, you wouldn't issue it. In some cases, insert it into a person's body. So, so that's crazy.
So it's just more pressure for FDA to play quick and dirty with the serious health and safety questions that they have to consider when they approve these products.
Yeah, see, that's the part that blows me away about all of this, actually, is that, we can talk about the policy issues, and they can sit in Congress and talk about the policy issues, but people die. I mean, the stakes are enormously high, and yet people are making these massive concessions to the drug industry. So we are recording this on Thursday. This will be broadcast on Saturday. What is the current status as of now of this 21st Century? Oh, well, first, before I go to that, I guess, any other things people should know about the 21st Century Cures Act?
There was a lot of lobbying around this. This was the most lobbied bill in recent history in Congress. I know McConnell, who received a lot of campaign donations from the regenerative medicine industry, included a provision at the last minute that would rush approval of regenerative medicine products, which includes like adult stem cell therapies, where you take stem cells from a person and inject them into other parts of their body, and then you tell them it's treating their condition. This is a very new area of research. There's a lot of kind of suspicious claims being made in this area, and this would make FDA kind of speed approval of these products as well, without a lot of attention to whether the evidence is really well developed enough that FDA should be accelerating this type of approval.
Yeah, it's scary stuff. So as of now, what is the status of this bill?
So as of now, there was a vote yesterday in the House, and the House voted to pass the bill. It's been passed in the House. The Senate will be voting next week, I think, on Wednesday or Tuesday. I don't have it in front of me. So we're urging our consumers to make calls to their senators now to express concerns about this legislation. And one of the key issues is that the latest draft of the bill was only released on Friday, right after Thanksgiving. So Congress did not have a lot of time to consider it before they voted. And as of this time, the language is locked in. They can't make any changes to it. So we think that they shouldn't be rushing something like this through in the lame duck when everyone's distracted with the Trump administration coming in. And this is just not a good scenario to be making important decisions like this.
Why is the language locked in?
Because the House has already passed it. So it would be...
But couldn't the Senate
has to vote on the same bill?
Couldn't the Senate amend it and send it back? I mean, I'm just procedurally, I don't know this stuff.
I don't know on the finer points on this, but at this point, they're not considering amendments to the bill.
All right, so people, in other words, so the short version is that people should, if they're hearing this on Saturday, call their senators on Monday morning and say vote no on the 21st Century Cures Act, right?
Yes, absolutely. And Public Citizen has a petition circulating that will go out on Saturday. Actually, you can sign on to that and receive a reminder to call your senator on Monday morning.
Where can people find that petition?
Go to www.citizen.org, and we'll make it available on the website.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks for your great work on this, Sarah Sorscher, attorney at Public Citizens Health Research Group, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And we will be right back after this, as we usually are. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.